everybody, welcome into the Cubs Weekly Podcast presented by Wintrust, proud legacy partner of the Chicago Cubs and exclusive home of Cubs Checking. Open online today at wintrust.com/Cubs Weekly. Tony Andracki joined by Andy Martínez and Bruce Levine. And Bruce, Andy and I talked about this a couple of days ago on the podcast, and this is a really good question that I know you've asked David Ross and asked Tom Ricketts. What do you make of this Cubs 2023 season? Was it a success? In your mind, what do you think?
I think it was a huge success. And by that I mean I have to take the fandom out of this for me by saying everybody was disappointed as to the end of the year and the 7 for 14 for the last 21 games. That was, it was sad. It was, a bad end to the season. But I don't think it takes away the joy and the fun that all Cub fans had all year long. I just think this was a likable team run by a likable manager, the likable president and general manager, with a group of guys that gelled together, and even the players who were left the team and were released had positive things to say. There was no rancor or anything like that. So from my perspective, I think it was a joyful year for Cub fans and something to build on.
Yeah, no, I agree. That it was a lot of what I said. I agree with Ricketts in the sense that you don't make the playoffs, it's not successful. But I agree with what you're saying about it being a fun year to watch. I think it was a fun year. I can speak for all of us to cover, right? You just hit on it, Bruce. Is these were good guys in the clubhouse. They were good guys to talk to, good guys to interview, and it was a fun team to follow all season long. So in that regard, and then I asked about it too, in just talking with Jed Hoyer. And, they set a new standard this year. They developed a culture and a winning culture, and that's something that you hope and you figure will carry over to 2024 and beyond.
And I think the big takeaway to me too, and Bruce, I don't know if you'll agree with me, but I think the big takeaway was whether or not whoever fan, Jed Hoyer, Tom Ricketts, whoever wants to decide whether or not the season was successful. To me, the big takeaway from Jed Hoyer speaking was that if the exact same thing happens next year, that is definitely not a success by any means.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, projecting winning, seasons year after year is difficult to do. Nobody projected that I know of anybody saying. I mean, I think I said they could win 84, 85 games, before the season started. But that's with me thinking that everything had to go right with the personnel that they had, and I think everything did go right for the personnel that they had. They brought in a couple good pieces toward the end that helped a little bit. But from my perspective, worrying about whether you're going to be a 90 to 95 win team next year it's out of my hands as a reporter. As a fan, you hope that incrementally the minor league system continues to bring good players to the team, and that they're better. Even if it's another 82 or 83 win season, and you have more farm system guys, more pitchers from your system contributing, I think you can't just automatically say, in advance of that's not going to be a good year.
No, I think that's a really good point too, and I think we definitely saw some good developments this year. We're going to talk a little bit later on. We're going to do a 2023 awards season interview type of thing. We're going to talk about Rookie of the Year, some of the more impactful roster moves of the season. But for right now, entering this offseason here, one of the biggest questions, arguably, in my opinion, the biggest question, is does Cody Bellinger come back? And I think that's one thing that fans want to know. It's a question that I've seen most often, I've heard most often from fans. So Bruce, we'll start with you. You don't have to make a prediction unless you're prepared to or not, but what do you make of this Cody Bellinger situation and how the Cubs may view this as to whether they're bringing him back or not?
If it's a bidding war, they don't bring him back. Okay. So will the Cubs offer a fair contract? What would be a fair contract to you guys? 6 or 7 years times $27 or $28 million? Yeah. Most people who know the agent, Scott Boras, and realize that this player is maybe the second best offensive left-handed hitter that's going to be out there, probably think that's not enough. That said, if you're an organization like the Cubs or any other, you have to have your limits. You have to have your years and your money limits. More importantly, Scott Boras has always been known as a guy that takes his top free agents all the way to late January or early February. I don't know if the Cubs have that kind of weight in them to see if they finish second there, and then they have an empty spot at first, center, and third or fourth in the lineup. I just think you have to make one of those. Here's our offer. You need to let us know by this time, or else we're moving on.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, like the timeline of it, because obviously in center field, like Pete Crow-Armstrong's there now. I don't know if opening day would be somewhere he would be, whether Cody Bellinger is on the opening day roster or not. I still don't know if PCA is fully ready, just based off of what we've seen. Offensively, he definitely seemed behind the eight ball a little bit when he came up. But yeah, I mean, first base, there's, depending on what they feel about Matt Mervis or whatever else, I don't know if they feel like they have in-house production. And then definitely in the middle of the order, I don't think that there's anybody internally that they can fill. And you're not going to want to sign somebody else with some other dead money on the book, with like the Tucker Barnhart and Trey Mancini deals and stuff that are still be on the books next year. I don't know that you want to sign somebody else that figures to go in the middle of the order and then sign Cody Bellinger as well, and then you don't necessarily have playing time for everybody either.
I would ask you guys the same question. Where is your limit? What is your timeline?
To me, I mean, I think I'm very of the mind that, like, if you're all about supplementing this roster and improving the roster, I think it starts with bringing back Cody Bellinger, right? And I think you can't really supplement or build on this roster, as Jed Hoyer talked about, without bringing back Cody Bellinger. So I'm of the opinion, like, you kind of wait as long as you can. And obviously, I don't know if you go into the $300 million range, but like you have to be aggressive, in my opinion, to bring back Cody Bellinger.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that as well. Like, I think, Bruce, what your point is dead on, is that if it's a bidding war and there's some team, and I mentioned this in the other podcast too, like, just like if the Giants, for example, they've had issues signing stars, and just in the last couple of off seasons, if they feel desperation for some level, or another team out there, I mean, the Yankees were rumored to be in on Bellinger too. Like, I don't know exactly how that would work on either of these teams' payrolls, but if some team like that comes out and decides that they would be willing to go up to 280 or 300 million or 9 or 10 years on a deal for Bellinger, I don't think the Cubs can compete with that. I don't know that they necessarily should compete with that, but I also agree with your point, Andy. It's just like, it's hard to look at the Cubs in 2024 and think this team is better or primed to take another step if Cody Bellinger's not in that line.
The other thing that I wasn't enamored with, and you guys were there over the weekend in Milwaukee, was, and Bellinger was terrific. I mean, he was terrific in the clubhouse, easy to deal with, great teammate. MVP should be probably third or fourth in the National League this year. But he totally talked in the past tense about being in Chicago. There was no rhetoric of, I'm hoping to come back. My wife and I love it here. This would be a priority. There was nothing like that. He was very politically savvy about, hey, this has been a great experience, teammates, everybody was wonderful here. I didn't get the feeling that Chicago was going to be a priority.
Maybe not. I know exactly what you're talking about. I mean, he did very much speak in past tense and speak about how much he loved this season. That also could be, like you said too, the politics of it, just making sure, talking with Scott Boras and the rest of that team is like, don't take any team off of the table, or don't even give the illusion that you might want to take any sort of hometown discount, which I think we all know he's not taking a hometown discount.
Here's the reason why they can't wait. And I mean, can't wait by past the winter meetings. He's going to hold you up at first base. He's going to hold you up in center field. He's going to hold you up as a middle of the order left-handed hitter. Yeah. Not just a hitter, but a power-hitting left-handed hitter. They're hard to come by. So those are three areas that, how can you build around that necessarily if you don't know he's coming back or not? How do you know where to put your resources if you don't know if he's coming back or not?
Well, I think the counter argument, and I'm not saying this is totally what I agree with, but like the counter argument is like you make space, right? Like maybe you do go and try to fill those holes, but if you can still get Bellinger back, like I think that creates like a quote unquote good problem to have. Right. Maybe that's something that could happen.
But the revenue you're going to have to spend
sure
there.
Yeah.
Right.
So how much of that money of the president's payroll can you spend on those peripheral things?
Sure. Yeah.
And still have $200+ million left for this guy.
Yeah, you don't know, and especially with the way the salary situation is set up right now, it is a valid question.
Personally, I'd give him a deal right away. I'd say, here's what we're willing to do. We need to know by November 30th. If you're not, we wish you well, and we hope you take the offer.
Yeah, I mean, I think Cubs fans would certainly hope that he would take the offer as well. He was one of the more beloved players here that just, from a one-year deal kind of guy, like who isn't necessarily from the area or didn't come through the system or whatever else. Like, I can't remember a time that I feel like somebody won over fans quite as quickly or quite as severely, I guess, as Cody Bellinger did. Everybody was all in on him at Wrigleyville throughout the year. Switching gears a bit, I don't think fans have always been all in on David Ross as manager. I think all of us can see from our mentions on X or Twitter or just hearing from fans or whatever else, there's a lot of the discourse out there about David Ross from fans is, I think, quite a bit different than it's definitely quite a bit different than what we've heard from players, from Jed Hoyer, from Tom Ricketts. And Bruce, I'll start with you. I mean, what do you make of the difference between what fans think and how they evaluate David Ross versus what the Cubs actually believe? And then just overall, like, what was your reaction to Jed and Tom and all of these people believing fully, like Tom Ricketts says, this is our guy, and the players passionately backed him. Like, what do you kind of make of that discourse between the two sides?
So I think Tom and the front office, starting with Jed and Carter, believe that he did a fantastic job, because you're talking about a team that was 10 games under 500, okay? At one point, they were 12 games over 500 on September the 6th before they started their nosedive. I think a lot of the discourse about him not being a good manager began with the injuries to Alzolay and the bullpen, and the deterioration of the bullpen and starting to lose close games, okay? That not only was physically debilitating, but it was mentally debilitating on a team that had built up a swagger about themselves, moving forward toward the playoffs. So from the perspective of Tom, and I think from Hoyer and company, they felt, him and the coaching staff must have done a great job if they could get him from 10 games under 500 to 12 games over, within a couple of months, and look like a team that was building not only with veterans that were there, but some young players were developing at the same time.
And I think that's the important thing too about David Ross was, I don't know if fans want to hear it or like they even care about it, but like I think it is a real remarkable feat to go from 10 games under to 12 games over to even to being in a playoff hunt. Like
that's never happened.
Right. That's right.
Yes.
And there's something I remember Dexter Fowler talked about on this podcast where it's like you can start losing games really quickly, right? You can show up to the ballpark and you're 5 games under, before you know it, you're 15, 20 under. Like that can happen very quickly on a clubhouse. And it didn't happen to the Cubs, right? Like the whole time throughout. And I remember sitting through it, and you guys probably remember it too, like going through it where they're 10 games under, they're 8 games under, and they're saying how good of a team this is. And like yeah, you want to hear that and you want to think that, but sometimes your record eventually one day speaks for itself. Well, they believed it, and David Ross came in with that mentality every day. Like, how many times did we see them have like a quote-unquote really, really bad loss, right? And come back the next day and play like nothing had happened.
Right.
It was a testament to the mentality that David Ross brought.
You have to remember that David Ross is a really hard-nosed baseball man, okay? He's a great communicator. I think he's an outstanding leader of men. But you saw in post games many times very short and quick answers, to the point where his face turned red, and you could see an explosion getting ready to take place because he was so upset as to some of those conclusions in games where they began, the last 3 weeks to lose games late. Okay, there was no bullpen to hold it up. Right. All of a sudden, the last 10 days, 2 weeks, they started to make physical and mental errors. Okay. Because the games were too tight, and it was just, what could go wrong did go wrong, and you saw Ross not being able to handle it. Handle it personally. However, he handled it with people extremely well. With his players, he was very consistent. With the media, he was very consistent. Okay, he just did what a leader was supposed to do. But you could tell. I mean, look, I've known him, since he was a player. You could tell he was boiling inside and ready to blow up and, want to strangle somebody from time to time, just like, everybody else in the fan base when mistakes are made. But kept his composure, I think learned an awful lot about adversity as a manager as opposed to a player. It's probably the first time he's had a serious adversity situation this year because he wasn't expected to win in 21 and 22. So as he said to us during the end of the season, the last 3 days, I've learned a lot about myself that hopefully I can use going forward as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that competitiveness that you talk about, Bruce, that came out with the team. I feel like the team was an extension of their manager. The resiliency they showed to, like we said, claw back into it. And even, obviously the last couple of weeks didn't go the way that fans wanted, didn't go the way the team wanted, but they were still right in there in so many of the games, and they're moral victors or whatever else. But like, to your point, Andy, we never saw this team give up at any point.
Right.
Like, that resiliency was there all the way down to the end, even dating back to their last win on Saturday. So I think that is absolutely a testament to Ross, to the culture he has built. And I think the multiple things that we heard from people like Jed Hoyer talking about, it's not just about in-game decisions. There's 7 hours before first pitch where there's 100 people, not really 100, but dozens of people that want your attention from the manager. And afterwards, your multiple hours, you want to go over it, and there's dozens of people that want your attention or need your attention, from trainers to players to front office members to media to whatever else. I mean, he talked to the media somewhere between 400 and 500 times this year, from spring training on, different radio interviews, different marquee interviews, plus pre and post every day. And like you said, to all of that, to be willing to do that. And Jed said he saw the same guy all the time. He saw a guy who was even-keeled throughout that process and is able to relate and be personal to players. Like, that's what a manager really does too. Like, in-game decisions, yes, but so many of those in-game decisions are also talked about with the front office before. Like, hey, we get into this situation, who are you using against this pocket of the lineup? It's not just one person that makes all of these moves all the time.
I will bring up one other thing, and that is David Ross is a guy of many talents, and he loves managing and being a baseball person. The question that has to be asked down the road is, will the Cubs get tired of him, and will he not be the manager down the road? But you also have to ask, will David Ross get tired of managing?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Will there be something else that he'll want to do? Will he want to spend more time with his family? Will he want to get back into media work and lighten the load? I think managing in the major leagues is the toughest and worst job in the game. Because the responsibilities there, if you're Dave Roberts in LA, you get absolutely no credit for a team going to the playoffs right now 11 years in a row. Under his watch, I think 8, okay? Winning a World Series in 2020, and people still say, oh, well, he's a metrics manager. They give him the lineup. He just puts it out there. He just keeps them rolling. Well, it's a lot more difficult than that.
If it was that simple, everyone would have Dave Roberts in the Dodgers.
So what I'm saying is, managing is a horrible job in baseball. You get very little credit for it. You don't get enough money. A couple $1 million a year is not enough for having to work the way that they do. Okay, I'm saying let's also kick the tires on the fact that at some point maybe David Ross wants to do something else.
Well, and I mean, that's perfect. Like, Joe Maddon was so beloved for helping lead the Cubs to the World Series here for the first time in 108 years. Look at the way the fan base, their thoughts on him and their criticism of him grew over the last couple of years. And same with David Ross. Like, he is one of the most beloved figures. He was carried off the field. Fans loved him. I mean, when has a backup catcher been that popular with a fan base to the point where he was on Dancing with the Stars, made this media career, and already so many Cubs fans are just done with him.
He's a great dancer. He could go into singing and dancing.
But to your guys' point, Jed Hoyer brought this up at his end of season presser, which was very interesting. Terry Francona, right? Probably one of, if not the greatest managers of this generation, probably Hall of Famer. He was getting criticized like left and right when he was in Boston, and look what he's become. Like, not comparing Ross to Francona or anything, but like just to say, like, there's always going to be criticism with that job. To your point, and no matter what he does, he's never going to make every single right move. It's just impossible to do.
Yeah, as you guys mentioned, Madden was criticized even after winning the World Series.
Yep.
Yeah, but he almost blew it. That's all you hear, okay?
But he
overused Chapman. Yeah, but he micromanaged those last games, and it almost didn't work out. So, as you guys pointed to here, it's not always going to be a job where people feel like they're being appreciated. It doesn't happen that often.
One guy I think the Cubs do appreciate a lot is Kyle Hendricks. What he has been able to endure A couple of inconsistent seasons, a really severe shoulder injury that kept him out of the last half of last season, first month or so of this season. Came back and vintage Kyle Hendricks. That's what we saw all year. It was his fourth start that he was flirted with a perfect game and a no-hitter in San Francisco and was really consistent. I think that inconsistency that he had faced in 21-22 did not show itself at all. Cubs have a team option for next year. I'm curious what you guys think. Are you guys expecting Kyle Hendricks to be a part of the rotation in 24 or maybe in beyond? Andy, I'll start with you.
I mean, I think, yes, just to get out of the way, yes, that I expect him to be back. I thought Jed Hoyer's comments were really interesting where he said, we hope he's a Cub next year and beyond, right? Like, to me, that makes me think, like, is there going to be some restructuring of a deal? Is there going to be a new deal maybe? Like, what's going to happen? Because clearly the Cubs not only want him for next year, but they want him for the next few years. And if you can get it right, like if he is what he was in 2023, that's a serviceable arm in the rotation for years to come.
Yeah, because he's not a power pitcher, I have more belief in Hendricks getting stronger, building out of this year, coming back. He was ticking at 90, 91 at some point toward the end of the year, something he never did even at his peak, back in 15, 16, 17. So, this guy could be the next Jamie Moyer, okay, where at age 35, he's just getting going again, okay, because the pinpoint command, the way he takes care of himself, the way he's meticulous about preparing, he might have 3 more years left in him. So I think when the Cubs talk about, as you well pointed out, Andy, this year and beyond, that was a tell, and that they might be thinking, you know what, $14 million, not a lot for a rotation pitcher at this point. We're going to bring him back and we'll discuss. Let's do a little bit more. I talked to Kyle Sunday night, and I said, do you want an extension? And he said, I don't need an extension right now. Let's just bring me back for 14. I want to be back with the Cubs, and let me just build on what we were doing here and be a part of the rotation. I'm excited about being a Cub for the future.
And it was a little bit different, like you said, than what Cody Bellinger said. I mean, Kyle laid his cards on the table. He loves being here. This is where he wants to be. If it doesn't work out, fine, whatever. But like he made it very clear that he would like to be back here. And I think it's a no-brainer, too, from the Cubs' perspective, of whether it's the option or an extension or whatever else. Because right now, you have Justin Steele for sure guaranteed into a rotation spot. You have Jameson Taillon and Drew Smyly under contract. You figure they'll get rotation spots. But Smyly struggled, had to go to the bullpen anyway. Taillon had a very up and down season, finished on a high note, but like you need stable, consistent forces in the rotation. Hendricks proved that he is that. It seems pretty simple to bring him back, pair maybe Jordan Wicks gets the last spot, Marcus Stroman, whatever it may be. But you want answers in the rotation going in next year. You need stability, and he provides that for sure. All right, we're going to take a quick break here on the Cubs Weekly Podcast. When we come back, we're going to hand out some of our 2023 awards, like Team MVP, Best Moment of the Year, and that kind of stuff. So stay tuned.
We know you love Chicago. You devour the pizza, admire Chicago's skyline, and cheer on Chicago sports teams, especially the Cubs. If you wanted to live in a more boring place, you'd live in St. Louis. Why not bank with Chicago's bank too? Upgrade your wallet with an exclusive Wintrust Cubs debit card, which you can get when you open a Wintrust Cubs checking account. Show your Cubs pride and open an account at wintrust.com/Cubs. Member FDIC, equal housing lender.
Hey everybody, welcome back into the Cubs Weekly Podcast. Tony, joined by Andy and Bruce, and we're going to talk a little bit about 2023 awards. We're just going to reflect. These are some of the yearbook type awards, MVP, Cy Young, that kind of stuff. So let's start with MVP. Bruce, who do you have? Who was the Cubs' 2023 MVP this season?
Well, I'm going to go with Dansby Swanson because what he supplied in the way of leadership, stability at shortstop, allowing Nico Horner, who was a top shortstop, to move to second base, and solidifying the defense up the middle. Even if he didn't hit 200, I thought he was a sensational player and leader. A stand-up guy, said all the right things, and you never felt like you were being BS'd by the guy, okay? Commanded a lot of respect in the room, gave a lot of respect, took on this responsibility of being coming over and leading the Cubs to a world championship to heart. So from the everyday perspective of leadership and the ability to help the team build the confidence as a winner, I think it's Swanson.
I think that's a really good point, and I think back to at the trade deadline when they were talking about breaking up the team, and Dansby was in Jed's ear about can't break this up. They can't break this team up, and then Jed joked about it in his end of season presser where he said that they're going to build an office for Dansby between Carter and his office, but then Dansby said he was out because he didn't want to wear khakis, which I just thought was a funny anecdote. But my team MVP is Cody Bellinger. I think it was clear that as the offense went, or as Cody Bellinger went, the offense went, and their toughest stretch was in May was when he was out injured and wasn't in the lineup. And then the last 3 weeks when they struggled, he wasn't performing to the same levels he had been performing earlier. Like, that offense went as he went. And as I mentioned, like, I think next year, like, he's such a crucial part if you can bring him back.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think Bellinger was for me to get that kind of production in 130 games, approaching 100 RBI, 100 runs, 20-plus stolen bases, 26 homers, I think is what he ended up with, over 300 batting average. Like, he was the one guy, I feel like, in the lineup all season long when he was in it that the other team had to focus on, and game plan around. And when Seiya got hot at the end of the year, then there was that too. But I feel like that trickle-down effect on the rest of the lineup was huge. And for me, he's my MVP as well. Team Cy Young, 2023 Cy Young. I'll go with the easy one, Justin Steele. He was in the Cy Young race probably right up until the end. I thought it was just a tremendous development this year. So for me, it was an easy call. But, Bruce, who do you have?
Well, you can't go away from Steele.
Yeah.
I mean, he was just too good for too long. Even started to build his innings toward the end of the year. In September, he threw one game 7, the other 8 innings.
Yep.
To me, that's a stopper. He did slow down in the last couple of starts. It was a little rough for him, like a lot of other people. But to me, establishing himself as the ace of that staff was huge, and he's got to be my pick.
Yeah, it's a really great story for the Cubs front office development where they can't develop pitching and they develop a Cy Young caliber pitcher. But just to differentiate a little bit, but I think it's definitely deserving. My pick was Javier Assad. I mean, I think for him to start off in the bullpen, then go to rotation, then go back to the bullpen, and then like he did everything and was good in all those roles, right? Yeah. 3.09 ERA in 109 innings, doing whatever. Like when Marcus Stroman went down, it was like, oh no, what's going to happen to the rotation? Javier Assad really filled that role seamlessly. He came in leverage situations, did pretty well in leverage situations. Like I think that's just an interesting arm to have next year, where you kind of have again some flexibility. Like you can stretch him out and have him start, or you can have him in the bullpen as a multi-inning weapon. Like I think he was a really valuable piece of the Cubs rotation.
I think it's a great point, and I think the biggest problem they have is a good problem. That is, how do we use him next year?
Yeah.
Okay. Can we just keep moving him up and back? That's really not something that you can have a plan with a pitcher. Is he a starter, or is he that Swiss Army knife that you can use in so many different roles?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and to your point, a good problem to have. And I think, as David Ross mentions with his relievers, he just wants out-getters, right? He wants guys that'll get outs. I think Javier Assad's the perfect definition of that.
Yeah, and he had a big year just in terms of like adding velocity and stuff too, and starting with the World Baseball Classic, pitching in some bigger moments, some bigger international moments, obviously, and then bigger moments in the regular season. I think was all very impactful for him. Rookie of the Year, Cubs 2023 Rookie of the Year. I know we were talking before the podcast. I don't know. Did you end up going with Assad for this as well?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Assad just because he's still under rookie status. Like I know he came up last year, but his rookie status was intact through this year. So to me, that was the no-brainer in terms of Rookie of the Year.
I'm going to go with the end of the year in Wicks. Okay,
that's a good one.
I think he's a really strong candidate to be top of the rotation pitcher going forward. Is he your left-handed version of Kyle Hendricks going forward? Okay, he seems to pitch very similarly to him. He seems to have ice water in his veins. I think the one thing that impressed me the most about him was the fact that whether he got beat around or he dominated, he was the same guy. Okay, you couldn't tell externally that anything was going wrong or right. The one start he had against Arizona, where they beat him up in the first and second inning, and he came out and he threw a clean third and fourth inning. That was tremendously impressive to me because it didn't make him go to the bullpen right away. He had to go in the fifth, but again, the composure for a rookie to be able to go back and put up zeros, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, for me, I thought about Wicks a lot. I'm going to go with Miguel Amaya. I just thought that his development, he was a guy that was out in the 40-man roster, but with injuries the last few years, nobody really knew what to expect. And I think Jed admitted it as well. Like, he wasn't anticipating Miguel Amaya being here and producing like he did, and essentially on the roster from, was it early May or whatever, all the way through the rest of the year. And to do that, to get the respect from the pitching staff, to work with Kyle Hendricks right away, and as Hendricks is calling the game in that San Francisco start, Miguel Amaya is back there catching, and Hendricks is calling on pitch comment, all of that stuff, and then to show well offensively, like he showed some pop, he showed an ability to get on base, he teased the potential that we had seen for a very long time. Yeah. And it's like all of a sudden the Cubs catching future looks a lot brighter than I think it did in April or before that. So I think for me, like, that was a really, really important development this year.
I think it's a great pick, and I think people should pay attention to the fact that next year you might see a healthier guy, because by watching him throw, I don't think he was able to throw the way that he needs to be an everyday catcher. But he was coming back from traumatic arm problems over his career. I think that arm will get stronger, and I think working with the staff that they'll be able to throw out more runners with him behind the plate.
For sure. All right, let's move on to best moment of the season. Andy, we'll start with you. What did you feel like was the best moment of the Cubs 2023 season?
I think for me it was the Mike Tauchman catch in St. Louis. I remember being there. I'll tell the story, but like the ball's hit by, I believe it was Brendan Donovan, or no, Alec Burleson. It was Alec Burleson hits that ball, and I remember from my angle in the vantage point in Busch Stadium, the press box is pretty high. I see it. I'm like, okay, that's a routine fly ball to center field. I start writing out my tweet. Cubs win 3-2. I can't remember the exact score, but Cubs win. They're like, whatever their winning streak was, whatever. Like, I'm writing out that tweet, and then I see Mike Tauchman just keep running back. And I'm like, oh, I think this is gonna be closer. And then I deleted the tweet as the ball is still in the air, because I'm like, oh, like I think that's a home run. So I delete the tweet, or I delete the text. I didn't hit send. And then Mike Tauchman jumps up, and I'm like, oh my God, he just hit that. And then he catches the ball. And my initial reaction was, oh, he dropped it out of his glove. Because the way his glove moved, it looked like the ball had fallen out of his glove. And I said, oh my God, he just blew it. Like, he just dropped it. And then he comes up and he's fist bumping and celebrating. And I'm like, oh no, he caught that. And it was a really big win for the Cubs. And Jed Hoyer at the trade deadline mentioned, like, that was one of those moments where you think, like, this team has the special, like, that it factor, that special moment to be able to do something. That was a really, really fun moment, really cool moment to witness live.
Thanks for taking all my fun. I agree with Andy. Okay, there's no reason for me to tell you anything else other than not only did that establish the highlight of the season, but it also established Tauchman as, at the very least, an important footnote in this year and in history for the Cubs. As you look back to great moments, that's going to be considered one of them.
And I mean, it established the Cubs as buyers, right? Like, that moment was one thing that Jed Hoyer even pointed to as, like, okay, like, we need to go out and add and supplement to this team. So yeah, absolutely an incredible moment. For me, I'm going to go with the Christopher Morel walk-off at Wrigley over the White Sox. I mean, I remember, like, getting over COVID actually at the time, like, watching that, like, it was crazy to just watch on TV and experience everything as it was happening. And it was an incredible game. I mean, the Cubs were losing, and everybody was like, oh, how can they lose to the White Sox, who had just sold off, and, like, crosstown rivalry and all the pride at stake was such a big deal. And then all of a sudden, like, Nick Madrigal homers, and then you just kind of felt it, right? Like, was it Bellinger doubled and then Swanson walked and then Morel comes up? There's, to me, just watching it, there felt like there was something, and you guys were there, so I'm sure you guys can attest to it a little bit more. But, like, then he hits it. As soon as he hit it, I was like, oh my God, the Cubs just walked it off. And, like, his celebration was one of the more epic celebrations we'll ever see. It was like this chill-inducing moment that, because all of Chicago was watching, because it was the White Sox as well, it was a pretty epic moment. And to me, it's a little sad that, like, it's not a moment that ended up leading to playoffs or anything, because those are the things that you feel like seasons are defined by. The Mike Tauchman catches and the Morel comeback and walk off, you feel like those are defined as they build a special season that goes to the playoffs.
And to be fair, I know it's not on your list, Tony, but we all know what the worst moment was. Okay, it happened when Suzuki certainly missed the ball.
Yeah.
Okay, and that shouldn't diminish the way that people look at Suzuki's year or his part of what he was to this team, because he was one of the great stories of this year. After being benched in July, to come back and be a guy that was one of the best hitters in the National League and to help win important games. So you hope that moment doesn't stick out for other people, because he established himself not only as an important guy in the team this year, but also a guy going forward with a few more years on a contract.
Yeah, that's actually something I was thinking about as we were talking about most important on-field development. I was actually thinking about Seiya as well, because there was the time in early August, right after they acquired Jeimer Candelario, that's like Seiya was on the bench against righties for a good week to 10 days. He started against lefties, and all of a sudden you're thinking, okay, what is Seiya Suzuki's future here? And like you didn't know. It was a temporary benching, but then it lingered for a little bit. He had not produced for 2 full months prior to that. We had seen really nothing but inconsistency so far in his Cubs tenure. Well, he's under contract for 3 more years, after this. Like, what happens? And him having the August and September, and then even after that moment to rebound really well and have, the next 4 or 5 at-bats were tough, but then he was an offensive force again in the games after. I think that was really important. For me, though, what I felt like was the pitching was the most important on-field development, was Steele's ascension to be an ace. I feel like you need an ace if you're going to be a legitimate contender. You absolutely need that. And I feel like you also need a guy like Kyle Hendricks, who, as we talked about, I think we all expect him back in some capacity. But that was a big question mark. What would Kyle Hendricks provide this year? What would the Cubs even want to try to extend him or bring him back next year? And he proved that very easily, that yes, you need to bring him back. He is a part of this team. So I think those were 2 supremely important developments on the team this year, was seeing these guys rise, because that's going to pay off, I think, really big next year.
So I had 2. I had Steele, which I thought was big to your point too. Like going into the season, it's like, who's this team's ace, right? And I know Marcus Stroman's starting opening day, but even going into the season, you're like, what are you going to really get out of Marcus Stroman? You didn't know. For the first few months, it was great, right? But Steele was clearly, he was a Cy Young candidate to the end. I thought that was the big story. The other one too was Nick Madrigal playing third base. And I've said, I feel like a broken record coming on the podcast and saying like Nick Madrigal at third base, but it was really a testament to the Cubs coaching and Nick Madrigal himself to at CubsCon to say like Nick Madrigal is going to be a third baseman. Like, it was almost unbelievable when you hear that, and then he comes out. Not only was he a solid third baseman, he was one of the best defensive third basemen in baseball. Like, to me, that to me is one of the better development. And I think if you're like a fan watching, and you look at maybe like Christopher Morel, it's like what position can he play, right? You say second base, center field, third, but like you throw out all these positions, what can he play? Well, like now you have some proof of concept with Nick Madrigal that like, okay, if you work out it in the offseason, like the Cubs have done the coaching that maybe you can get Christopher Morel in one position and you can solidify maybe a hole on the team.
Yeah, you can. And it's sad about Madrigal continuing to have the same problems with his legs, okay? Yeah. It really puts a damper on what was a great story, as you pointed out, him really stepping it up. But the one area that we missed out about, which was so essential, was for so long, from spring training on, nobody talked about who was going to be the closer on this team. Yeah. And Alzolay has to get a lot of kudos for being the guy to step up, and somebody that in the offseason here, if they do add to the bullpen via trade or free agency, they have a very solid piece in Alzolay going forward. We're hoping that he's going to be okay. His elbow, forearm was inflamed at the end of the year, and you hope that's going to be all right with rest. But I thought that was a terrific story of him not only taking that position, but standing up and being the man out there.
Yeah, and I think the celebrations after, like, that was a huge part of it, because that's what fans at Wrigley want to see. They want to see a closer come in with some cool, walk out music. I guess it'd be walk in music, yeah. And like an awesome celebration, and like the emotion that he showed. Guys were joking that it would take 2 hours after he was done before he can calm down. So I thought that was really cool. Absolutely. Most impactful roster move of this season. I mean, Bellinger, I think, is a layup. If you guys do either of you guys have Bellinger as the most impactful roster move?
No, to me, it's definitely Dansby Swanson.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, solidifying defense, it's not sexy. People are not really excited about hearing about defense, but the keynote for the season was defense and pitching and defense. And to solidify not only shortstop, but taking an outstanding shortstop, making your second baseman, having Bellinger in center, having Gomes step up and be the man behind the plate, where we didn't even talk about what a huge contribution. To me, Swanson is the guy that they're building around and will continue to build around for the next 6 years.
My most impactful. It was probably like under the radar. Like I don't even, like it's so under the radar. I don't even remember like exactly when it happened. But getting Mike Tauchman on a minor league deal, clearly he kind of changed the lineup. I think my biggest what if of the 2023 season is like what if he had been on the roster since opening day. Like how do things transpire? What kind of happens? We'll never know. But I think that was like the Bellinger and the Swanson were like really, really like big signings. But I think Mike Tauchman was such an underrated signing and really lengthened the Cubs lineup.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to go a little bit off the beaten path too, under the radar, but I thought Julian Merriweather, like a waiver claim on him,
that was a good one.
Bullpen, Bruce, you mentioned like there were so many question marks in this bullpen going in. Julian Merriweather was one as well. He had never stayed healthy in his career, had shown elite stuff. But he was the guy from wire to wire. He was the one guy in the bullpen that was down there because Mark Leiter Jr. never went on the IL, but was down for a week or two here or there towards the end of the season. Like Merriweather was the guy in high leverage moments pretty much from day one. So I think that was a super impactful development, a guy under contract next year too.
And I will say too, remember like he had a lot of struggles in that first month. Like he had his first few outings he had like a 9-something ERA, and it was like, ooh, like maybe this wasn't that great of a waiver claim. And by the end of the season, you're like, what a great claim.
Yep, for sure. All right, last thing here. Biggest surprise of 2023. Andy, let's start with you. What do you got?
So I had two. I thought Hendricks and Steele were it. But I thought the biggest one for me was Yohan Gomes. There was a lot of, like, think back to a year ago, right. Where we were a year ago from now. It was like, are the Cubs going to bring back Wilson Contreras? And if not, like, how do you solve the catching issue? And it was kind of like, well, like, what is your catching situation if you don't have Wilson Contreras? And I think, like, probably from almost day one, well, Wilson Contreras, outside of when he came to Chicago, wasn't really thought about. Like, it was like Yohan Gomes took that position, ran with it, and he was great defensively. He was great as a game caller. And it seemed like every other day, it seemed he would have a big hit for this team. I know you joked about how we hadn't gotten to him yet, but I thought that, to me, was the biggest surprise of the year. Like, you went in with so many questions about the catching position, and couple that with the Miguel Amaya, you go into 2024. If you're a Cubs fan, you feel pretty good about the backstop position.
I thought it was Tauchman leading off. Okay, he set the tone for the offense when it took off. Every game, it reminded me a lot of when Dexter Fowler was on the team, and back in 15 and 16, and you would see him take 7, 8, 9 pitches, starting a bat 0-1 or 0-2 and work it up so where that beginning of the game, everybody on that bench, the batters that were coming up, they all got to see what the guy had already, and the guy was already getting frustrated throwing too many pitches. I thought he was just terrific, taking pitches, getting valuable hits, and just showing a lot of calm and collectiveness for a guy that had never been the man to lead off an order. I thought that was huge for them.
Yeah, calm, I think, is the best word to describe it. Like, every at-bat you saw from him was calm, regardless of whether he's facing a tough lefty, game on the line, whatever it may be. For me, I'm going to go a little bit different, where I thought Keegan Thompson and Hayden Wesneski were a big surprise in the fact that they turned out to not be essentially impactful arms at all this season. And Wesneski won the 5th starter spot with a brilliant spring, and Keegan Thompson was one of the better relievers and a weapon out of the Cubs bullpen the last couple of years, a multi-inning weapon, a guy that we were talking like maybe he's in the 9th inning picture on some days, especially if you need a multi-inning save. But he was a guy that had started for the team in the past and so on, and by the end of it, Thompson spent most of the year in the minor leagues, struggled with control. Even when he was called back up in September, he didn't end up pitching the last time that he was called back and ended up being optioned down. Like, he just was not a factor all season after some early struggles, especially after that Astros outing. And then Wesneski, he started as a starter, went down to the minors for a bit, came up as a reliever, pitched mostly in low leverage. But to me, it was like those guys, and I thought there was like this wave of pitching that was coming up. Outside of Jordan Wicks, we didn't really see that this year from these guys.
One thing before we're over with, I want to say is that the front office deserves an awful lot of credit. By that I mean they made mistakes like every front office did. They made a mistake on Hosmer. They made a mistake on Mancini. They made a mistake on Barnard. They owed Mancini and Barnard money beyond this year. Yet they were not afraid to make the big move and say, you know what? We're trying to win. As much as we like these guys, they were all pros. We're not going to stick around and watch them just not get the job done. So kudos to them for making the move and then also making the hard move by releasing them and finding better people for those spots.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, the Mancini signing, I think we all thought was going to be something that he would be a middle of the order at bat or maybe hit 6 or whatever in the order for them all year, and just didn't work out. But definitely see where the Cubs front office was coming from on those moves. And like you said, Bruce, I think that was also an indicator that like this team is ready to win and push their chips in. And they did some of those moves, even leading up to the deadline as well. So it was a really interesting, fun season. Like we said, we're really curious to see what this offseason holds and what 2024 holds for Cubs fans. So thank you, as always, for tuning in, for watching us. As always, we are sponsored by Wintrust. Head to the Marquee Sports Network app or YouTube to catch us in video form, or download and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. For Bruce and Andy, I'm Tony. Thanks again.